So today on Deep Thought, I want to go through something very simple. Like I'm always telling you, I want to help fortify society in a way that you have more power in your life to control your life. Now, as of June 2015, there's this giant, a bunch of rumors from the alternative media sources that we're about to have the collapse of the economy, which is going to severely impact the well-being of all people on Earth if it occurs, right? I won't go too deep into that whole thing, but there are a lot of reasons why people believe that something legitimate is taking place. So I want to fortify us while we have this opportunity to communicate. Because if they do what we suspect that they want to do, you just seeing this video might be impossible. Who knows? I tend not to be an alarmist myself. I tend to think that utter chaos in the universe which is relative to our planet in this particular case, is so difficult to control that I think that the ruling class of the banking institutes that run our world, they know that any battle plan only survives the first shot, right? And then all hell breaks loose. So I feel like if they believe that Americans will take away American rights, they have miscalculated to a degree that's going to be actually pretty laughable once it actually takes place. All the soldiers who've ever heard us say, hey, they're trying to make you destroy your own country, they're trying to make you feel patriotic for going over and fighting banker wars while your family at home loses all their rights. They've heard what we've said, and they're like, I hear you. I don't believe you because I'm very institutionalized in this military-industrial complex, but if this shit happens, then I'm going to switch the switch in my mind, and you're going to actually be a person who tells the truth. I thought one of the coolest things we could talk about is just keeping educated. Because the world, as you know, is not the same as it used to be. It used to be you could learn a trade and then stay in that trade for the rest of your life. That doesn't work anymore. Okay, so what do you do in its place, right? And I would say become as skilled as possible at the things that you love that actually make money as quickly as possible. Because once you love something, then it doesn't feel like work, and learning and remaining educated in it actually also is effortless as relative to something you're being forced into that you don't want to do, right? Now, I've had tremendous numbers of careers in my lifetime that all paid the bills. So that's what I call a career, right? One that pays the bills. And I've done a few things that haven't quite paid the bills, but have earned quite a bit of money for me. So you're looking at a guy that's actually been through a lot of different careers. When someone asks me what I do for a living, I feel horrible because it's like the answer is so esoteric and so different. It's like, well, today I do this, maybe tomorrow I'm doing that, because I have all these different careers that I can just flick switches on and then turn on. I'm doing this thing that doesn't really do this other thing, right? So, a super quick background on me is that I've been in the software business, the video game business. On the outside, I've been an artist. I do a lot of artwork for various institutions when they call me up, which is how it works, right? Like ArcLight Theaters here in Los Angeles, one of their main guys calls me up, and we do a lot of promo. And so I'll go from cutting code to going into Photoshop and stitching together all this green screen stuff to create like photoreal interpretations of a lot of studio shoots that they've done for promo. So I have sort of a left brain, right brain thing going where I've been an artist my whole life, and I've been an engineer my whole life, and an architect. At the same time, I dabble in screenwriting when I can. The screenwriting is the one thing that I love that I haven't been able to quite pay the bills with. So I'm trying. But in my art side of things, I've been a painter for a really long time. I've sold a lot of paintings back in the day, and a lot of digital artwork for video games, digital artwork for all kinds of promotional stuff. A lot of it just for fun. Anytime I'm conceptualizing something, I usually generate a lot of artwork. So if I'm working on a video game, even if I'm not the designer and I have an idea, I sketch it all out and bring it in fully complete, right? Storyboards, all that kind of stuff. On the engineering side, I've been an engineer in several different languages, several different platforms, so I've got a lot of juice in that area. I used to do music for video games in the 90s, and then I got into sound effect packages for the video games. So I've done that whole musical side of things as well. And then I got into management, and so I helped, manage giant teams of folks that do this. And so the beautiful thing was that my experience allowed me to manage the individuals because I had personal experience in what they were doing. So when a coder tried to bullshit me about, this can't be done, it can't be made that small and have this number of features, I would go in and overnight just program it, be half the size, do everything I wanted to do, look exactly what I wanted to look, hand it back to my coders and say, I did this. I'm your boss and I did this. So don't give me any more crap about what can't be done. And then of course we're all friends. So, but it's just, that's so much fun when you get to kind of mentor folks like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Yoda, it can't be done. And then he lifts the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp, right? That's a sweet spot in the world. That's how I was taught, right? In my careers, I've always had to remain self-educated. And that doesn't have to do with anything in my philosophical research, my scientific research, which is just something I love that entertains me, that has no paycheck in it. That's just me doing what I love to do. And I shouldn't say it doesn't have paychecks, because I do get paid every once in a while to speak at colleges. And so when I go and talk to kids, I get little tiny checks. So it has paid the bills. But I've been able to keep myself fresh, And again, in the software industry, if you program in a language, then you know that everything that you know in about 2 to 4 years is going to be obsolete. They always reinvent the languages. It kind of creates this crazy job security. And it's completely absurd that they re-engineer these languages. They never make anything easier. They make things more difficult, more convoluted, just to make sure that the workforce in America, I guess, which usually barfs out these languages, can stay employed for a little while until the third world countries figure it out, and then they take over all the profits, and then we re-engineer the language to cut them out. It's this whole ridiculous process. Instead of people making money on being creative, they make money off the process of enabling people who are creative, right? Which is another reason why we have to get our right brains restarted in the world. But I want to impart on you how to remain educated, because I can say to you, hey man, you got to stay educated. And because if you don't, the jobs are going to come and go, and you won't fit the new jobs, right? You'll become obsolete, as they say in the Twilight Zone episode. And it's not just as simple, in my opinion, of saying, hey man, go learn something. Because you're taught that there's an era of your life to get educated, and then life starts, and you do always pick up new knowledge. Everybody knows that. But there's a difference between letting life teach you some basics and actually becoming more academic and more aggressive in the actual how-to of whatever you're interested in. So let me give you a couple examples. The world is becoming ridiculously technical. And we have seen in my generation, I'm 45, I still have friends of mine who think that they can finish their life without learning computers. I mean, even becoming a consumer capable of launching Microsoft Word, typing a letter, sending an email, visiting a web page, all those things, using a cell phone. They actually make these little sayings that they're not technical, and they try to make it cute. And that's not going to work. That's not going to work. Those people are going to be incredibly unemployed if the low-hanging fruit jobs of those who are non-technical disappear. And sadly, there's some of them are stuck in institutions that aren't technical, and so they go to work every day, and the institution that they're in, the office or the whatever company they're in, refuses to take on new technology. So that sort of keeps them down. So if they want to get educated, they're going to have to do it in their private realm. But the amount of times that I have had to completely re-educate myself to keep my salary, my quality of life going is so much that if you had a gun to my head right now, I couldn't name how many times I've had to re-engineer my life. I could get probably pretty close, but there's a big difference between close and exactly on, right? So let's take the formal educational system of most first world countries. You have, as a child, a phase of your life that's sort of a preschool phase. Then you start what we call in America grade school, which is, it's been a little bit re-engineered since I was a kid, but it's essentially kindergarten through 5th now in most areas of the United States. Some states go to 6th grade as well. I do agree with them that 6 probably belongs in what we now call middle school, which is called junior high when I was a kid. And then we have this junior high. It's about 3 to 4 years, and depending on where you are in the United States. And then you have high school, which is 3 to 4 years, depending on where you are in the United States. And then once you launch out of that, you sort of have the basics of life, right? But what we're able to get out of those first 12 years of school is actually relative to the cultural status of your country. And why would I say something like that? Well, back in the Civil War days, the average education stopped at 8th grade. But the average vocabulary was 20,000 words, which is why when you read a Civil War soldier's letter home, it takes an academic to break down the vocabulary such that you can understand it. Kids read Shakespeare today and they struggle to understand Shakespeare. I certainly did. But a kid from the Civil War being taught in a barn house or in some church house or some little schoolhouse way down the road, they could read it and understand it. But we can't. Our average college graduate has 2,200 words in their vocabulary. The average high school student in America has 1,200. That's not that many words, but that's how awful the educational system is. And we've unionized in America the educational system to ensure that the individuals who don't want to work very hard, they love that socialistic bubble to live in, right? They come out of high school, they go through just enough education to get into the educational system, and then they hide in the educational system their whole life, having never really lived life, having never really felt corporate America or what everyone else is living for. But they have a union that protects them. It protects them so badly that they can become pedophiles. They can touch children, and these unions will protect them. It's crazy. They can be the worst teachers with failing students, but the union protects them once they hit what's called tenure, which I believe in some sectors of America can be achieved in 2 years. Infinite protection after 2 years. You can be obsolete as a teacher, and you'll still have a paycheck that goes up every single year, regardless if you perform well. So you can go hide in those institutions. Your whole life will be flushed down the toilet if you're not doing what you really want to do, if you're simply just hiding, right? But in America, again, in the mind, we see the chunks of education. An average high school student sees 3 phases: grade school, middle school, high school, all right? For those who want to go to college, you see it in 3 phases. You have your graduate work, your postgraduate work for your master's, and then your PhD, if you're so inclined to go that far, right? Even at the upper echelon of education, a PhD, let's just say, you have people creating these degrees that don't always have experience using the degree in the private sector. And so what they do is they postulate in their mind. They make it up in their head of what they think you need in order to get the job that they're trying to give you a degree for. And I'll give you an example. A friend of mine went into nursing school in her late 40s because, again, all of her executive assistant background just fizzled out. You know, it just was hard. The jobs got eaten up, and she had to move and lose her contacts and that kind of stuff. So she went into nursing school. Now, nursing is primarily a medical assistant, right? And you can, there are all kinds of levels, right? Some nurses are almost PhD level physicians. But even just a basic nursing position in America, she had to take computer class. I thought, well, that's probably good. There's probably computers in the office you got to use, and so she needs to be a really powerful consumer, user. She would call me up for help with her homework. And, I've been with computers since they originated in the personal computer industry, right? I think like they think. I see the freaking electrons moving over the components inside the computer when I think of a computer, right? So if there ever was an expert in computers, I could raise my hand and fear not the test that would be handed to me. However, the anatomy of the computer courses that they gave her were unbelievably ridiculous, including making her understand the various protocols of USB ports that have existed over the years, ones that have been deprecated and out of use for years. She had to learn the model numbers of USB ports, right? This is a nurse. This is a nurse who all I fucking want her to do is make sure I don't die in the ER. Really? That's all I want. So if I'm in surgery, make sure my blood pressure stays up, make sure I don't die. Not go home and service my computer. Crazy. So, but this is made by a school of morons that don't have any actual experience being nurses. They don't have any actual experience in the real world. So they design courses that are utter crap. And because education in this country and around the world has huge loan programs, because they've taught the colleges, hey, just like a car dealership, if you can sell the car and get a loan to a bank, we'll give you a kickback on the loan. And so these institutions are trying to create as many degrees that are low-hanging fruit degrees that kids without any goal in life or any, real education prior to college can actually pass the course and get hooked up to $100,000 worth of debt, if not 3 times that much, right? So that's why we have a bunch of degrees in this country that actually have no employment. I could walk into probably any university and find at least 30% of the degrees where if I sat down the professor and I said, I get a PhD in this, what can I do? And the only answer they have back is, well, you can become a teacher like me and teach this crap to teach it. Meanwhile, you're sucking, again, hundreds of thousands of dollars out of the students that go through that. Not good. So a lot of parents now around America are now taking their kids out of school and teaching them themselves. And when this first started happening in America about 15 years ago in droves, we had a lot of the rare cases where parents were not that educated themselves, and so they put the video camera on that person and show sort of an uneducated person teaching their children, and the children can't obviously exceed their teacher's wisdom unless they're really driven. And so it became this sort of nightmare scenario for most of us Americans going, oh my God, they're destroying their families, push them into schools, push them back in the system. And that's before we understood the conspiracy against education. But now most of us are pretty cool with it. We're like, good. There's all kinds of cool courses you can buy that are accredited. So essentially the parent's learning just as much as the kid the whole time, which is also a great thing. So you will find that, and I should say this, I never got a degree. I went to college for about 2.5 years. I took all the basic, what we call the AA, associate degree stuff. I took courses I loved, language and science and a bunch of stuff, writing class. That's where I met my co-host, Kyle Tauchers, in a creative writing class that we took together. Probably the best part of my whole college is meeting him. But what I figured out was that you can educate yourself if you're just driven to do so. And a lot of times when someone says that, because I've said that to a lot of people, they'll say, well, I'm just not that smart. I can't teach myself. I got to have it taught to me. When you say that to yourself, you make that true. But when you stop saying that to yourself and you go, well, maybe I can, a whole new world opens up. But what I want to do is split that out in just a little bit. When you buy a book and you want to educate yourself on something, you might end up initially going to an academic institution. I used to live next to Stanford University, a couple different universities in LA, and I would always raid their bookstores because when I would write a screenplay, some of the best research books are pretty high-end academic books, and I'm always writing something that's hard, like either it has a lot of Native American history that I'm trying to split, or super scientific sci-fi stuff I'm trying to split. I would get into these books, and what I realized very quickly is that if I hadn't been a scientist as a kid and really bought just dozens and dozens of books. I used to belong to these book clubs when I first moved to California. One was like psychology book club, one was a science book club, like a space sort of, it was actually robotics and cosmology and that kind of stuff. I used to just devour these books, What I figured out very quickly when I started raiding these college bookstores was that there's a different voice in every book. And people who try to go self-educate, who fail, typically get a book that doesn't speak in a voice that actually matches the way that they think in their brain. And it's extremely important to find the voice that speaks the way that you think. Now, today, with electronic books and with giant bookstores, you can find the book that talks exactly the way that you think. And so if you ever go to a bookstore, and let's say you haven't self-educated, you open books, and you're seeing other people open books, and you're looking around going, well, why is everyone opening the book? I mean, maybe I should look smart here, and I'll just open the book and look inside. Well, what they're trying to do, typically, if they're good, and if it's not a piece of fiction, right? Fiction, you're just trying to find out if you keep tabbing through, is it interesting, right? But if it's a factual book, you probably want to go in fourths at a minimum, and 25% in, 50%, 7,500, and try to find out if the voice is speaking to you. And it doesn't mean there won't be complicated stuff that you might have to read 4 or 5 times, but even if you can't understand a particular section in the book, but the rest of the book is okay, you're going to come away actually smelling like roses. Now, I should say, too, with the internet, there's YouTube videos for almost every subject that you want to be involved in, from craftsmanship to science, that kind of stuff. Yes, the more institutionalized the material comes from, the more propaganda you're ingesting. So, again, if you want to study science and you go to NASA, they lie through their teeth 24/7 about everything. So be very, very careful. Try to get to the rudimentary science of what they've built their propaganda on, and then you'll actually have an ability to see through their smoke and mirrors, and you'll be able to imbue yourself a lot more knowledge. But they have, I just give you a good series that's very, very well written. Now, when you want to get smart, you're thinking of the word smart. There's something intelligent, something like that in your mind. You're like, that's my goal. I want to be smart in this particular area. You're already smart in something else, right? And unfortunately, one of the greatest series of books out there is called the Dummies series, right? And you've all seen them, right? So-and-so for Dummies, Trigonometry for Dummies, Calculus for Dummies, or whatever subject you want to study. And I will tell you this much. I have unanimously been able to pick up those books and read them just like the wind. They are so well written with authors that break it down to the most minuscule level. Now, if you're an upper academic, you won't want to read these books. But if you're at the very, very bottom and you're considering learning something that might actually improve your life, it could be improving your soul. It could be a penniless thing. It's just something you're going to make yourself feel better about, or something you're going to turn into an actual career. Those books are fantastic. And there's a lot of series out there, a lot of different publishers. A Press is fantastic. O'Reilly's great if you're in computers. Just know that there's an infinite amount of material out there. If you have a physical bookstore, that's the best way to go in and figure out whether or not the book is for you. Most online bookstores actually have a sample chapter they're going to give you. And it doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. They need to give you sample 2 or 3 segments, excerpts from chapters, like I said, throughout the book. But I've had fantastic luck with that as well. Now, to loop back to the indoctrination that we get about education, one, I find it very powerful to understand that the geniuses that control our world today, that are the ancient geniuses, right? Your Newtons, your Isaac Newtons, your Copernicus, your Beethovens, all these incredible academics that helped us out. Now, some of them had very privileged backgrounds, very privileged education. But at the same time, if I said, I'm going to take you back to the 1700s and I'm going to take you to a science class, most people would be pretty arrogant that back in those days we didn't know much, right? Certainly before Isaac Newton came around, you would have a lot of interesting ideas, right? Galileo and stuff, they all injected their DNA into the system. But what they did was they self-educated because they invented things that didn't already exist. And yes, they are very special folks that whatever connected dots happen in their childhood, they managed to really come up with these things without any knowledge. But you have that too. And the problem is that someone's convinced you that you don't, so you don't try. That's really the biggest crutch in life, the biggest inhibitor in life and limiter in life, is that someone convinced you that smart people are a different gene pool than you. Celebrities are, super talented people are a different gene pool than you. And that's super unfair to you. They also compartmentalize in your mind, and it's not necessarily a conspiracy, it's just we have to institutionalize educational systems in this country, or in all countries. And so you have these start and stop moments in your life. And because learning does potentially hurt the mind, not hurt as in damage, it just thinking is a laborious process sometimes. It sort of physically hurts in your mind to not have the answer because you want the answer as mankind. That you're sort of relieved when education is over. And because the majority of our education is through adult supervision, we have this pressure on us from above, whether it be your grandparents or your direct parents or your peers. There's this huge pressure on you to learn. And a lot of the objectives that you are forced to learn, a lot of the classes that you're forced to learn, they aren't what you would pick for yourself necessarily. Now, some of that's fantastic because you need to learn things you don't know about, and once you learn about them, you'll find out that they give you a tool chest for life, right? But the danger of the stop and start paradigm in your mind of education being over at 22, if you just get a basic degree, is that it tells you that the rest of life is going to be, just experience it now. Just take what you've learned and experience it. And if you think about how immature the average human being is at 22, and if you bake that immaturity backwards and say, okay, as you get younger from 22, you actually were less mature, right? There's no way you could be more mature in your past unless you got hit on the head, right? So when you learn something, it's all about its purpose in life. That's how you ingest it. What's the purpose of me learning this information? And if you don't have a purpose yet because you haven't experienced life, then, or the way that you grew up was all sheltered away from other, trades. Like if you were growing up in the Midwest in Kansas in, say, the 1800s, as a child, you saw all the careers that were necessary to run society. You saw the farmer, the blacksmith, the seamstress, the cook, like the bakery or whatever, right? You saw all these careers and you saw them do their jobs. And so by the time it got for you to go into an educational institution, you knew why you wanted to know a particular career. Today, we don't have that. It's look into your cell phone until the second you have to declare a major, and then you dumbfoundingly pick whatever sounds good, and then you go off and get it, and you realize it had nothing to do with who you are as a human being because you have no idea who you are as a human being on average today, right? The millennials. God bless the ones that know who they are at this point. I know a few kids that really know who they are. It's fantastic. We need what we've lost in that whole thing, and what we need is to make sure that after school's out. Definitely you need to take a break, and it's probably insane that we send our kids perpetually to school. They've taken the summers in America, and they've crushed them. When I was a kid, you went to school September 1st, and you got out May 25th. And you had June, July, and August completely off to just explore the universe and figure out what it's all about, who you are, make your friends, get your heart broken, whatever. But now they've shortened the days, which creates a huge dependency on the parents breaking their backs to find after-school care, which is part of the conspiracy, we believe. They start late sometimes. The teachers have more days off now than you could ever conceive. When I was a kid, a teacher taking a day off school would be like your drill sergeant in the military taking a day off while you're training. It doesn't happen. Like they would only take a day off if the country said you absolutely have to by law not come to school. When I was a kid, man, they pounded you over the head. So they've taken the school days and they've shrunk them. They give a bunch of time off, 2 or 3 spring breaks, and then they take that summer and they crush it. And some parents love it because they're like, man, I know I don't have to take care of my kid for an extra month. They stay in school the extra month. The whole routine that we've developed stays and stays and stays. But that's a very self-serving objective. The kids aren't getting more educated. They're getting less educated with shorter attention spans and less summer to figure out who they are and that sort of thing. And so when we come out, we're so ready for a break. We're so ready for a break. And we do need a break. But what they should tell you in the last year of school, I think, in all first world countries should be the following. You're going to learn for 8 hours a day how to take care of your own education after school is out. After the last year of high school or the last year of college, that's what you should be learning from your school. And they should have resources available for you to continue your education by yourself. Now, if you're a doctor, you know that this happens anyway because you have to read reports and journals about new procedures. If you're an optometrist, my uncle was an optometrist. He went to conferences at least twice a year for quite a while, and then it reduced to once a year. But, when they have new LASIK surgery, and when he graduated in the 50s, they didn't have LASIK. His buddy actually created radiokeratotomy. But he had to go learn about it because he's looking at eyeballs that need to be fixed, patients asking questions about what their options are, and he'd have to find out what the new techniques are. So in some institutions, some school systems, some degrees and some jobs, you will self-educate. If you get into computer programming, I warn you, you will never rest. You will never rest. There's no language you can learn and keep for 20 years. You just can't. Even if you're one of those guys that wiggles his way into legacy computer companies that programs dinosaurs for a living, it's not going to last more than maybe 10, 15 years at best. And then when you fall on your head, you'll be the most worthless coal, to the industry, because no one will want to use what you know. So be careful, right? The other side of the educational system, which I keep pounding in this conversation, is you. It is you and yourself picking yourselves up by the bootstraps, right, as they say, and saying, wait a minute, I did think I didn't have enough time, and so I haven't tried. One of the things I find out is that people ask me, God, where do you find the time to do all the stuff that you do? Because I'm always cranking out 4 or 5 things all the time. I'll say, here's a new movie I wrote. And people are like, what? How'd you write a film while you work on this job, while you're doing all this other stuff? And I'm just like, I make the time. Now, granted, I don't have 4 kids running around the house. But what I have found is that I have buddies that have those kids, and they still work as hard as I do, if not more. And they still engage their children. They're still good parents. So there is time. But what I find is that there's a really screwed up set of priorities, at least in America, where a bunch of crap that doesn't matter gets prioritized up. Now, I have to be careful how I categorize this, because some things are social with your family, and I don't mean those things, like going out camping and maybe watching a couple shows with your kids at night. Make sure you got a movie night with your kids. Make sure you go to their events, that kind of stuff. But you'd be amazed if you take the stuff that's just your thing, and at some point where you're a consumer. Now, you do need to relax throughout the day. I'm not trying to say, this is an absolute theory, but I do it, so trust me. You can cut out the little tiny slice of your week. You need to create a schedule for your week, and it's not a schedule to follow like, okay, this particular Monday I get to do this, Tuesday I get to do this. Forget that. Just make sure that you can identify when you have time. And you're going to have to probably communicate with a spouse. You might even need to communicate with your kids. And I'm telling you, kids love it when their parents are cool. And when your parent does something that's fun to them, there's an energy that flows off of you, right? Let's say that you paint ceramics. That's your love in life, right? And somehow you sell them. You sell them finished. Take them back to the ceramic place you get the casts from, and they fire them up, and then they sell them off as finished products for somebody who wants to come and just grab a gift real quick, right? It may not pay the rent, but it's something that makes your soul feel wonderful, right? When mommy and daddy's soul feels wonderful, kids feel it. They feel it more than you feel it. So there's hardly a way to fail in this process. Now, what do you pick? What do you pick as your thing, right? Now, there's 2 priorities. If you're looking at a job that has 2 eventualities to it. One, you hate it. You hate your job. This is going to be this first category. Or you like your job, but it's threatened. It's threatened by the industry. Maybe you screwed the top on a toothpaste by yourself, and now there's a robot that's going to come do that for you. And so you're going to be obsolete here in that particular version of your skill. Then you're going to have to go after a career secondary thing. You're going to have to educate in something that's going to have to pay all the bills that you currently are responsible for. That's a little more, that comes with a different tense. But let me share with you an esoteric thing that might help you galvanize your thought process towards something that is going to be career-oriented. We think we can't do things all the time. We think we can't get serious about things, and if nothing else, we think we can't find the time to make things happen. And then a crisis occurs, a real one. And I'll give you a couple different ones. You go to the doctor, and they tell you have a life-threatening illness, and it's something that's been created by you. You eat that food that you're not supposed to eat, and you've been making little funny jokes about how that doesn't matter, and it caught up with you. Well, when you go home and you stare at your family and your relatives and your friends, and you look in that mirror, you're going to go, holy crap, I just got to stop. I just have to stop right away. Boom. And you will stop right away. Boom. That thing that was impossible to change, you're going to change it overnight. Now, let me give you a couple fictitious ones. Let's say that, I'll give you one that I learned in Kung Fu. I actually studied it for a little while. And one of the things that they taught you in the first day was that a lot of females are predestined to be subservient to the extent they don't believe they can defend themselves against some bigger person, right? And Kung Fu is cool because they don't teach, if you study the really deep schools, the old ancient schools, they don't teach you all this stupid crap to give you 30,000 belts, right? I always laugh when I look at all the belts in Taekwondo. Taekwondo is like a style of fighting that's financially lucrative, right? Look at your kid got a belt today, kid got a belt today, your kid got a belt today. Got thousands of variations of the colors of the belts because they're trying to sell you this thing, and they tell your 12-year-old that they can beat up Arnold Schwarzenegger. Here's your black belt. But I studied two things, Kempo and Kung Fu, and what they told us was they took a female and they put her in the middle of the room, and they said, okay. They put someone up against her, and they just freak her out, some big bastard, right? And they let her feel that first. And she just absolutely melted. Just kill me. I can't defend myself. And then they did the ancient Chinese secret, as my teacher said, where they said, now, it would have been cool if they could have actually done this physically, but they said, they pulled the guy away and they said, okay, now, the scenario is the following. I didn't give you a scenario before. You were just sitting in a totally objective room getting scared to death by this big guy. And then they said, now, I think the woman had children. So they said, do you have children? Yes. And she goes, okay, now I want you to imagine as best you can the children around you. They are in front of you. And this big guy is going to be reintroduced to you. But this time, he doesn't want to hurt you. He wants to hurt your children. He wants to kill them. And he's going to make it hurt, right? Because he's all into that kind of thing. And this woman completely galvanized. She became a golem, like an iron statue of resolve. And she got into it, man. It was the most amazing transformation I've ever seen. And this guy came at her, and she stood her ground. Now, she may have died because of the guy's skill over her at the time because she hadn't learned anything yet. But that showed me that there's this transformation that happens through your perspective of things, right? So when you think about the time that you have in your day, I want you to play a mind game with yourself. Play a mind game that this is really important. That this isn't just an elective off to the side. This is something that will make you love the mirror better. It'll make you feel, more relaxed when you go to bed at night. And it will just enlighten you. The other thing I want to tell you is that as you're trying to carve up time, there's no rules. There's no rules of how much time that you need to start and finish something. Now, if you're a craftsman, there might be a caveat where you have to get out your tools, use your tools, and then clean them up and clean up the stuff, right? I do woodwork with a buddy of mine, and we spin these gigantic logs into vessels, right? We hollow them out and put them in bags and then bring them out a year later and sand them all down, that kind of stuff. We create a gigantic mess. If you think about a log, most of the log being shipped away, we've got more chips around us than the actual log itself, sort of thing. So there may be certain caveats to that, but I think even testing out your process and maybe organizing your tools in such a way you could actually get in and out at a much quicker speed than you ever thought. But most things, especially if you're learning out of a book, 10 minutes, that's a whole section in the book, a page in the book, The other big one is out of sight, out of mind. Now, I'm going to give you a larger example of that first, and then I'll give you the smaller example. When I manage companies, I'm a big proponent of out of sight, out of mind. What's that mean? Well, I found out that when you have a reporting structure within a department, I used to make video games at Electronic Arts and other internet representations of those games in the marketing division. I would have a producer who's the head guy reporting to, he would have an artist and a coder at a minimum to create some sort of promo. And they would always want to ask the artist, how you doing, how you doing, how you doing, how you doing? And it got to the point where the artist couldn't get anything done. And then as soon as the art was finished, they would bother the coder. And so I bought a 36-inch plotter, big $12,000 printer at the time, which is now pennies on the dollar. It was a big behemoth beauty. And I would take the schedule in Excel, and I would print it out about once a week, and I'd put it on the wall. Every single project was on that thing in the wall. So now the producer walks up to that calendar and looks at it and doesn't have to bother my artist. Now, if something was really hot, we'd do a little addendum, small one, that we'd send directly to the producer so they would always know. But they don't have to stop production to ask the question. There's no show and tells that anyone's getting ready for, right? Because a lot of times just saying it's okay is not good enough. All right. Now, let's say that you are studying something that takes a couple books, maybe just one book. You got to keep that book in your line of sight all day long. What do I mean? Well, it's in your living room on the coffee table right in front of your chair, but you got to go to work. You pick the book up, you put it in your briefcase, you carry it under your arm, you take it to work. As soon as you get to work, you put it in your line of sight. You get a minute to go to the bathroom, you get a minute off, you take your lunch, you're not going to do anything anyway, so you bring your sandwich, you take it to the break room, you go across the street to the restaurant, you take that book with you, and you read a page, a paragraph, anything, right? Entertain yourself. Reread something if you didn't quite get it the day before. Work's over, you take it home, you bring it with you, you go to the restroom, you go anywhere you are, you devour that book. If it's something you need to think up, something you need to design because you're a seamstress, you're an engineer or something, you take your notebook that's empty, and all your notes start going in that, and you take that with you everywhere. So you have to keep it in your line of sight. A lot of us like to play instruments, right? And no matter how much you like or know an instrument, there's always something to learn. And so you have to keep that in line of sight as well. A lot of people buy really fancy guitar stands, like to keep things on their walls and all this other horse shit. Well, in the end, if it's up in a really beautiful area or it takes a lot of effort to bring it down, or you haven't cleared a space for it in a nice, accessible area in your house where it looks good and it can sit there and it's not a problem with the wife, then you're not going to use it. So you have to embed in your life the things that make this educational process possible. You get my point. So that let's say that you're totally convinced of what I'm saying. You're going to go re-educate yourself, or continue to educate yourself, excuse me. A lot of us re-educate as well. You might be asking, well, where do I start? Well, aside from some of the behavioralistic things I talked about, one, kill the paradigm that education ever ends, because it never ends. It never, ever ends. And just because someone else is forcing stuff on you doesn't mean you're in the game. I'm talking about the game where you are driving it for you. That's the game I'm talking about. It's the only thing worth living for, right? We are in the golden age of information. As screwed up as information is, and as propagandized as information is, when you talk about a trade skill, the beautiful thing about most trade skills is they're totally non-subjective. What's that mean? Well, if I said, you want to be a chef, you want to be a celebrated chef, okay, well, culinary school is one option. You can always go back to school at a later point in time. But if nothing else, when you cook, there's no politics. You know, when you cook, there's no religion most of the time. So you're just in this beautiful process where using your hands, or using your mind, your visual cortex, maybe your hearing, to all your sense of touch to actually put together something that's good to eat. The buddy I do the woodwork with, we spin wood. He has these logs that are cut down in Santa Monica, and he has them shipped to his house. And he cuts them up with a chainsaw, and we kind of eyeball where we think the vessel is in the best realm inside this piece of wood. And we chainsaw it down, throw it up on a lathe, and chip it away. Well, it doesn't matter what he believes, what I believe. It's just a beautiful moment. So the beautiful thing about learning is it has no propaganda attached to it. Now, there are things, if you get into history or something like that, you might actually run into some of the stuff. But let's leave all those esoteric jobs aside, philosophy and that sort of thing aside. There are books out there, there are videos out there, and most of the time, the people that write the books and make the videos are accessible. You just need to learn to be very polite and understand they probably get a lot of contact from people depending on how popular the piece of material you're viewing is, right? If a guy has 10 million views on a video and you try to contact him, you're probably never going to hear from the guy. If it's the New York bestseller, you're probably not going to hear from the guy. You might be able to go to a book signing and throw a question at the guy, but overall you're not going to get it. But a lot of the super academic books out there that will teach you what you need to know, maybe they sold 10,000 copies. You know, if anything else, they're looking for a groupie to tell them that they did a good job, you know. I have reached out over the years to unbelievable amounts of vendors and authors and had incredible responses. I think I mentioned in a previous essay that when I was a kid, I was about 13, I wanted these scented markers that were made by I think it's Barry and Smith, people who make crayons. And so I wrote them a letter. I just hand wrote a letter at 13. I said, look, I'm trying to find these smelly markers. I went to Wichita, the nearest city over, couldn't find them. I can't find them in my hometown. So Smith writes me back. Someone from the Smith family wrote me back, really fancy letterhead, sent me the wholesale catalog, sent me the markers, and I was a wholesaler for Smith stuff in my hometowns. Any kid who wanted stuff, I could get it for him. I wrote model companies. There was a little Testers model company that builds a lot of World War II stuff, and they were selling these little tiny people that would go in your little scenes that you might build. And this one guy, I think his name was Goodman. I forgot his first name, like Mike Goodman or something like that, if I remember right. And I wrote him a letter and I said, how are you painting these things? So beautiful, right? I managed to figure it out after I wrote the letter, but he writes me back and he's like, man, I don't get very much fan mail. This is really cool. And he goes, well, here's what I do. Blah, 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 all the products. I think maybe even sent me a couple brushes that he uses and that kind of stuff. So you can engage the people who know what you know. Just realize their time is extremely valuable, and as long as you can empathetically feel how they feel receiving information, how busy they are. Some people talk your ears off. Some people will only want to say, yeah, you can do that, and I got to go. As long as you can feel how that works, you can use resources all around you constantly to learn stuff, right? But I do believe in self-education. I do believe that folks who haven't done it and have anxiety about being able to do it, I'm going to suggest, just like going back to the gym after you haven't worked out for years, it feels impossible on the first day that you would ever come back. But if you push through it, you'll get there for sure. And I know that sounds professor positive, and you know a lot of people just say, well, was it Monty Python said on how to be a scientist? He said, well, go to school and learn something, and then find a cure for something, and then you're done, right? It was just like that simple little phrase. I remember when I became a lifeguard as a teenager, my whole family were lifeguards. I went down in May, I think it was like May 10th or something, in the middle of winter in Kansas. I think the water was hypothermia level 60-degree water. And they didn't care, man. They're like, look, if you want to be ready to be on that chair by summertime, which is less than a month away, it's going to be really hot here, you're going to have to jump in and make it work. And I remember jumping in. I was out of shape at the time. Even though I lifted weights, I had no cardio in my body. And I nearly died that first day. I mean, I went home just feeling absolutely wasted. And luckily, because I live in a small town, and the woman who owned the pool, Norma, she called my grandmother and said, I hope he doesn't quit, because, you know, he really has the potential to make it happen. And, of course, I went back, and I did just fine. I became a lifeguard. Same thing when I went surfing for the very first time. You know, I got waterlogged with a bunch of salt, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I was eating a lot of the water. It was bad. Thought I would never make it. And then I went back, and it was cool. So you can always push through those bubbles, as long as somebody usually tells you, look, it's going to be weird at the beginning. Don't worry about it, man. You know, if what you're doing seems impossible at the beginning, it's usually a sign that things are actually going to work out just fine. Because of one thing, your difficulty rating is way up here at the very top. That plateau I was telling you about, it's way at the very top, and it's not at any of the other levels, because then it starts going down immediately. No matter if it's down really slow or a steep decline in difficulty, that's what you're looking forward to. So when you're doing something and it hurts, just make sure that you understand that's part of the process, and then it only gets better over time, right? So I'm going to throw you a category of work that exists all over the world that a lot of people completely are oblivious to. yet they are extremely skilled at the job. Weird. What's that mean? That means you're good at something you don't know you're good at. One of the positions I find that people are extremely suited for is what I call in my world a producer. A producer is someone who understands a process, a craft, some sort of institution, some sort of machine that's actually making things happen, and they understand it from soup to nuts. But they don't have a job contributing in it. Or maybe they're down inside the trenches actually worried about their academic prowess keeping the job, right? Like if you're an engineer, let's just say, and you're a great C++ coder, but everything's going to Swift, and you're worried about being fired. There's something called a producer, which is a little bit different than a manager. A manager is typically taking care of human beings, but this is even called a manager at some levels. But what it is this. Take any profession in the entire world. There are people that do the work, the hands-on labor, and then there's people that coordinate that handmade labor through a pipeline. It's a great place to go if you've been in an industry for quite a while. You look for that producer level position, which is basically someone who's good at logistics, scheduling, and you've dabbled enough in the other careers, or at least you've got a cubicle mate that's got the other career that you've observed, and you've dealt with some of the contingencies, right? Some of the problems along the way. And so you have this innate ability to say, well, I know how that's all put together. And if this guy's an issue, I know how to do this. And in addition to scheduling, you know how long things should take. So someone tries to BS the system on, it's going to take 3 weeks, but it takes like 3 hours, 3 days. You can go in and say, well, I can save you money by managing this group of people. In the video game industry, we have a pipeline that essentially takes the whole game from start to finish. But within each discipline, there's a code pipeline, there's a music pipeline, an artistic pipeline, and a design pipeline, typically. And individuals can be on top of that, what we used to call associate producers in Electronic Arts. And the big producers on top of all the associate producers, really sort of as a manager, right? So if you are stressing about a trade skill, working with some piece of physical objects or code or whatever, that may not be your bag. Your bag may be in the logistical producing side of everything. So definitely keep that in your mind as you're perusing careers. You can transition up into it, or maybe you've always been at that level. Because no matter what company you join, if you were to join a company at work, which is nothing wrong with that, they have their own family way. So if you worked at Activision, for instance, the biggest video game company on the planet, and then you switch to Electronic Arts, you're going to have to relearn the family way. There's going to be things that they did that they don't do, and you're going to have to learn. They're going to be different titles for different positions, right? They're going to say, well, Activision, I was called a producer, but over here, producer's God, so I'm an associate producer over here. It happened all the time when I was in that industry. Know that that's another piece of social mobility, upper mobility that you can have is to use what you know. But definitely understand that getting educated right now is easier than it's ever been in history. You can find a master online in whatever interest that you have. In fact, you can find multiple masters. If you want to find a great pencil sketch artist that's going to teach you how to draw an eyeball. I did this once the other day. I searched up eyeball, and I've always known how to draw eyeballs, but I don't know what the hell I was doing. But I just got entranced that I could look up anything, right? It's all there. So definitely reach out into modern technology, especially if you're older, if you're over 45. A lot of times you have paradigms in your brain, well, I can only learn at college. I can only learn through a book. Flush all that out of your system. If you're younger, you're laughing already because you do it already. The other thing I'd like to say at the very end of this is that if you're successful at all at any of this stuff, or you already do it, then please pass this message to everyone else you know. If you have kids, pass it to them. Don't, make sure they understand that after college it's not over. You got to keep educating, and that's a fun, exciting thing. In fact, if anything, they get to control their own curriculum after college. No one tells you what you have to learn. It's up to you to learn what you need to know. And I actually have a secret belief that if we started kids off this way from the very, very beginning, and just made sure they had reading, writing, arithmetic, and some physical health things, that the rest could be left to them as long as you could provide the resources for them to learn, and they would be geniuses at what they do. I've got friends of mine that went to private schools. They saw their teacher once every 42 days, and they finished the homework in the first week, and so they had the rest of the month to themselves, and they're more articulated, more mature than most of the people, including myself. So it can be done, right? Again, I don't have a degree, but I've had more careers than most human beings, professionally speaking. So, that can be done as well. So I want to say that, one, thank you for joining these deep thoughts. They're very detailed in most cases. They're sort of an essay, but they're sort of jacked up over an essay. This is more essay than most of the deep thoughts. I have learned a few things about recording these, not to keep my cell phone next to my audio supply device, because I had an episode where there's a lot of cross digital chatter going on. And then the other one is I probably won't smoke during these shows because it's a little bit disruptive, if not tremendously disruptive to the process. So that's my commitment to you moving forward. So if you tune in, you don't have to worry about those two anomalies occurring. So I do study the final product quite a bit. I don't censor out a lot of the mistakes unless they're just grievous mistakes, right? Which I thankfully haven't made any that I know of. But anyway, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. As always, you can go to mkultraradio.com. Over 100 episodes you can see there online. The links to both YouTube and Facebook are at the top. Please, dear God, go to the Facebook and join us if you have a Facebook account. What you share is what we share. Your comments craft our episodes, so it's very, very important. We've made very good friends with people we didn't know before the show, and I all I can say is that that's, if nothing else, between Colin and myself, our reward is having met these individuals and constantly getting to hear their stream of consciousness. We agree almost 99%, and we don't even try. It's really interesting. So again, thank you for listening, and as we always say, learn the rules that rule you. Over and out.